Welcome back to the channel, guys. Welcome back to each and every one of you. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day today. Today we are going to be taking a look at Watch Dogs 2 on the 5950X and an RTX 3080. Now, some of you may be wondering why we're playing a game that's a few years old. It may not be the newest, hottest thing, but this game is still one of those, like, unoptimized games for PC that doesn't really run that great, even on the newest hardware. So we're going to be testing out how the absolute newest of new hardware can run this game in 2021. So when this game first came out, it had the exact same issues that Watch Dogs 1 and Watch Dogs Legion currently is suffering from. Watch Dogs Legion has a lot of the same tendencies that Watch Dogs 2 has. So when Watch Dogs 2 first came out, nobody was really able to play it without turning down settings. It was super unoptimized. There was a lot of frame stuttering and a lot of just general weirdness and bugs in this game. This game did not release too glowing reviews about performance or general gameplay, anything. It was very buggy. It was just a very buggy experience upon launch. So of course today we are going to be testing that out on the RTX 3080 and 5950X at absolute maximum settings, as you guys can see over here. We have everything at maximum, even the headlight shadows, which that is actually a very taxing setting. We have everything turned up at the highest that it can go, except for the temporal filtering, but everything else is at the absolute highest it can go. So we will, of course, be testing out 1080p, which is my native resolution. I play on a 1080p 144Hz monitor, but we'll also be testing out 4K and 1440p in this video as well to give you guys a good demonstration of how it'll run on different resolutions with this kind of hardware. And before we jump into the actual benchmarks and the actual gameplay, I did just want to thank you guys so very much for 300 subscribers. We're at 310, I think, last time I checked, which is amazing. You guys are phenomenal. Thank you so much. I apologize once again that I still cannot make videos as often as I would like. I do stream on Twitch for the most part. That is my first come first serve is Twitch. So if you guys do want to follow me on there, link is in the description below. And I will also have a link to my merch store and my Patreon. If you guys want to support my videos here on YouTube, if you guys want to support me on Twitch, do all that stuff like that. I'm actually making my own little Skyrim mod as well. So if you guys want to just generally support me, the Patreon is the best way to do that. Plus, you can get some cool Mr. J merch as well. Link in the description below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into Watch Dogs 2 on the 5950X and the RTX 3080. Alright, so here we are in-game. Again, maximum settings, 1080p, absolute highest settings, and we're getting about 80 FPS. We're getting about 80 FPS. We're using about 25% of our CPU. It's the number right above the D3, D11. So we're using anywhere between 20 and, maybe 30% in that, like, 10% range. We're only using 5 gigs of our VRAM, and we are using 95% of our 3080 here. So it actually is using a decent number of our little CPU cores and our GPU. Like, it actually is taxing a pretty good chunk of our CPU, but nowhere near what it was before. And we're actually getting pretty good FPS here. We're getting about, 75 to 80 FPS, depending on where we're looking, what we're doing. Let's see if we can take a car and see what happens to the FPS here, because in typical Ubisoft fashion, typically, whenever you get into a car and start driving, the FPS will just tank. So let's see what happens if we start going full speed down this road here. It looks like it's handling it pretty well, actually. It looks like it's going pretty well. Handling it about 70 to 80 FPS, if not higher. Once we drive away from some of the NPCs and the densely packed city areas, we're now closer towards the 80s. Looking pretty good, still using about 20% of our CPU there. 95% of our GPU packed solid. Which, actually, I do want to make a comment that 95% of our GPU is actually better than 100, because that'll allow just a little bit of wiggle room if you guys are wanting to stream. That extra 5% is pretty much all you'll need in order to run a stream off of your GPU if you guys want to use the NVENC encoder inside of OBS. You'll want that 95%. That means it'll be using all of what it can for the game, but leaving a little bit of headroom for any streams or any shadow play recordings or what have you, anything like that. So not running too bad, actually. This is actually pretty playable. I mean, I would expect nothing less from a 5950X and a 3080 in 2021. But at the same time, this was one of those games that a lot of people couldn't play on the highest settings because their computer wasn't good enough. And now here we are, playing it on maximum settings in 1080p, getting about 80 FPS, fully playable. Absolutely. Nice. That's pretty good. And so because this game is older, there is no options for ray tracing, there is no options for DLSS or anything like that, pretty much. I mean, there's pixel density, so we can actually just turn up the pixel density to like 1.2, and it should increase the resolution slightly higher, allowing for even more pixels, so that way you can maybe turn down your anti-aliasing setting for better pixel density. But that's pretty much all you get here. Is there's no like DLSS, there's no ray tracing, you know, there's none of that. I'm actually really impressed by how this is actually running right now. So let's start crashing into things and seeing if we can cause some chaos or whatnot, and see if we can get some of that FPS to drop by getting some of the physics and everything. Let's see what we can get here. So we're dropping down into the mid 60s just by crashing into a bunch of stuff, causing chaos, causing the physics to go just crazy. But still, I haven't seen it drop below 60 yet. I mean, this is at 1080p, so we'll see what 1440p and 4K does, but this is not running too bad at all. Alright, so what I want to do next is, if you're not happy with the 60 to 80 FPS at 1080p, if you maybe want to try turning down a few of the settings to see what you can get that, just to see if you can like min-max your frame rate just a little bit higher into maybe the 90s or something, or maybe 100s, let's see what we can tone down to actually get that FPS up just a little bit higher, because now we're in actually the 58 here. There's a lot of NPCs going on, so we're actually dropping to the 57, 58 territory. So let's see what we can do for dropping down those settings. Alright, so here we are. All I did was I turned the game from the custom maximum settings down to the very high settings. So we're still running the game pretty much maxed out. It's just like maybe one notch down from completely maximum. And now we're in the hundreds, 120 section of the game, which it's butter smooth. The only issue I would have with it is that the anti-aliasing, I think, is a big part of why the FPS drops here, because I'm seeing some of the far away things, even like the signs over there and stuff like that, even the cars, like the grills on the cars, it's kind of like doing that like flickery, pixely looking thing. Like it is looking a bit like pixelated already just from turning it down to there. But if you're playing at 1440p or 4K, you're going to be turning that off anyway, so it shouldn't be that bad. But let's go ahead and see what this does, these new settings do when we're driving. So we're still in the 120s, 130s, somewhere around there, using about 37, 38% of our CPU right now. And we're actually, because we turned the settings down at 1080p, we're using less of our GPU now. We're only using any between, what, 70 to 85% maybe in there. I think I saw like a 91 or something at some point. So we're using slightly less of our GPU for slightly more of our CPU because, of course, we're rendering more frames. Here, let's get this motorcycle. That might actually be a better test for rendering things super quickly, because this might actually be faster than the car. Alright, so we're still not dropping below 120, maybe, at the lowest with the very high settings on, and the game doesn't look too bad. Again, I feel like if you were to play on very high settings, maybe you would turn up the pixel density to maybe make it look just a little bit more crisp. Just a little bit more, instead of having all these jagged edges around. But even then, that's not bad. You double your FPS, maybe, you know, just by turning down a few settings here and there. That's not terrible. That's not terrible at all. Alright, so I think that will go ahead and conclude the 1080p portion of this video. It does seem stable. There's no real FPS drops, there's no real issues with it. Even on completely maximum settings, getting about 60 to 80 FPS, to me that's fully playable. This game is gorgeous, this game is smooth, there's no like little hiccups, no little micro stutters here and there. There's no real issues with it at 1080p. So let's go ahead and kick off the 1440p testing now. So I will see you guys in just a bit as I restart the game here and kick on the 1440p setting, and I will see you guys in just a bit. Alright guys, we are back. We are back at 1440p here with the pixel density at 1.0, so nothing extra has changed. We have the game back at completely maximum settings, everything on ultra, with the anti-aliasing turned off because you're at 1440p, so typically you won't use anti-aliasing because there's just more pixels, so there's no need to have that anti-aliased edge because there's just more pixels. So, as you can see, the game does run in the 80s and 90s while at 1440p, so not too bad at all. And this is, again, maximum settings. I think this will actually run a little smoother for you because this game is pretty CPU dependent, so running the game at 1440p helps take away some of that extra CPU load and puts it towards the graphics card. So running 1440p, you're still getting 70 to 80 FPS, if not 90s, depending on like where you're looking, how many NPCs are around, if you're driving or not, because we do have to take into consideration that this is a Ubisoft title, and Ubisoft games are notorious for using a lot of CPU and using even more CPU while you're driving super fast, hence why I'm just getting on a motorcycle and driving, because typically for Ubisoft games, this is where they fall apart, is while driving. And so far, we're only using 30% of our CPU, we're using 95% of our GPU, getting, what, 70 FPS and 1440p? Like, completely maximum settings, so that's not too bad. Still using, you know, 5.6 gigabytes of our video memory here, so we have plenty of room for video memory here. Plenty of room of the 10 that we have on the 3080, the 10 gigabytes. So we're doing pretty well at 1440p here. We are doing pretty well. And I think one of the settings that we could turn down just to get even more frames is this extra detail setting over here in the options. There's this tiny little setting for extra detail. I turned that all the way up just to give it the fairest, like the true maximum settings test across the board of different resolutions. But you can probably turn this down to maybe like 25%, if not less, and it should help alleviate some of that little CPU bottleneck area. So now we're more steadily in the 90s no matter what. And if we turn that off, I wonder what we're gonna get as well. If we turn the extra detail all the way off, because that setting is typically more taxing. Yeah, see, now we're like inching towards the hundreds too. Just a natural 95 FPS in this game at 1440p, maximum settings, without anti-aliasing, of course, without the extra detail, and this is what you're gonna get. That's pretty good. Yeah, we're just gonna keep driving around a little bit, getting different situations happening, different number of NPCs on screen, and just seeing how it handles all of that. And we're actually peaking into the hundreds here at 1440p maximum settings, so not too bad. Not too bad at all. If you're playing on a 1440p monitor with a setup anywhere close to this, if you have like a 2080 Super, a 2080, or even a 2070 with like a 3600X, 3700X, or an i9, something like a 9900K, really any hardware, I think, should be able to push this game pretty well now. They have done a number of patches towards the performance of this game, and it seems like it's finally at that stage of being mostly playable on pretty much any hardware. I know that for me, I did test this game on my old i7 6700K and my old 1080 Ti combination, and it did okay. I was able to get it to like 40 to 60 FPS on like medium settings at 1080p, so it like, if you have some older hardware, it's going to struggle a bit, but if you have some of the newer hardware, you're totally golden. You're totally fine. But I think that'll go ahead and conclude the 1440p moments here, because I don't think you're getting 90 to 100 FPS just by turning extra detail down. So I think that's pretty good. We'll go ahead and just conclude this test, and I'll see you guys back here in the 4K testing. We're going to see how this game runs at 4K. Alright guys, here we go. We are back at 4K with the pixel density at 1.0 yet again, so we're not adjusting any of the resolution past 4K, it's just native 4K there. We are of course running the game at absolute highest quality. We'll set this back to 100 as well, so we get the truest definition of ultra settings across the board. Craziness. So now we're at 4K maximum settings. Let's see how it runs. We're getting 51 FPS, dropping into maybe the high 40s here and there, but pretty much 60s across the board. That's not too bad, actually. That really isn't. Using 96 to 97% of our graphics card here. Only 6.4 gigabytes of our 10 gigabytes of video memory, so our 3080 isn't really being challenged at all in terms of video memory, at least. We're still only using 20 to 30% of our CPU here, so really not challenging any part of our computer at all. And that means the game is fully playable and streamable. If you have a 5950X, you can slap a, slow encoded 900p stream on top of this on your CPU, and it shouldn't even really matter. It should be like an extra, I don't know, you'll be using like 70% of your CPU, something like that. Like, you'll still have plenty of room for other things as well. Like, this is really not that bad at all, even with the extra detail on there too. We're still getting about 50-ish maybe FPS at 4K, which I would consider that pretty good. 4K 60, that's pretty good. Absolute maximum settings with the extra detail turned all the way up as well. That's pretty good, man. I gotta say, that's really nice. Alright, so what I want to do now is I want to turn that extra detail setting down to 0% to see how much, if any, performance boost we actually gain from turning that setting down. Alright, so here we are with the extra detail setting turned down to 0% at 4K with everything else maximum quality. And you're now getting a more stable 60, it looks like. We're in the mid-60s across the board, even while driving. So that should be the main setting you look at turning down, is the extra detail. If you're not getting the FPS that you would want, before turning everything down, just try the extra detail setting, because that one seems to have fixed our 4K. Now we're getting 60 to 70 FPS at 4K, just by turning the extra detail down. And we're only using 20% of our CPU instead of like 20 to 30. So we're using, I think I just saw 26% there for like a brief flash. But it's pretty much under, it's been under that the whole time. It's been, 19, 20% somewhere in there. So the extra detail setting is nice, and I'm sure it can help the game in some ways, but I haven't really noticed much of a difference. Doesn't help it's really foggy out in the game, but I haven't noticed much of a difference with the extra detail setting off. So that should be the first thing that you do, is tweak that. But yeah, this is running pretty nice across the board, I would say. Still not using more than like 6.5 gigs of our video memory. We're using 97% of our 3080 total for the actual like board itself. We're using about, what, 20% of our CPU still. Like, we're not taxing any of it. So again, if you want to play at 4K and you want to put a slow encoded X264 stream from OBS onto your CPU, like, just do that. You can do it 900p, and that'll be an additional 50% CPU from the OBS stream on top of that. You'll be totally fine. So I don't know why there's the flickering. I don't know if that's showing up in the video portion, but there's like a flickering going on, and I'm willing to bet that's the fog texture having not a good time. So I don't know why that's actually doing that, but yeah. Just thought I would make a little note that it is kind of flickering a little bit, and I don't actually know why. I don't know if it's my monitor or if it's the fog in game. I'm hoping it's the latter of those and not my monitor. But outside of that, we are still getting about 75 FPS in this game. It is looking gorgeous still. And still running really smooth. Alright, I think that will go ahead and conclude this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for hanging out. I hope this was helpful for anyone out there looking at this game, seeing if they can run it now. Hopefully this gave you some information on that. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, guys. Once again, if you guys are new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button. That would mean a lot to me. Hit that bell notification button as well, so that way you can be caught up whenever I post a video. And my Twitch link will be in the description as well if you guys want to go follow me on Twitch. My merch link is down there too if you guys want to go buy some cool little merch. And if you guys want to support me on Patreon, that link is now available as well. And yeah, But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you guys very much for 300 subscribers as well. You guys are fantastic, and I truly appreciate all the support and all of the people coming in over here and saying hi, doing the comments, being supportive and all that stuff, telling me that I'm doing a good job. Because I do try, and that means a lot to me. So thank you. You guys are awesome. And I will see you guys back here in the next video. Bye, guys. Wee!